Hello and welcome to a special episode of Dyad in the Force. I am your host, Darth Choco.
And I am Element 7.
Today we have an awesome show and we are going to be diving deep into this book behind me. You can't see the whole thing. It's Into the Dark by Claudia Gray. It is the third book of the High Republic. We were so excited because Claudia Gray doesn't miss. Spoiler alert, she didn't miss this time, but please stick around. Hear our thoughts and go into the comments and leave us your own. We'd love to check them out here. But right here on Dyad in the Force.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Dyad in the Force. We had to invite you guys back. You know, you guys have been past guests for Fern was on for A Test of Courage and Sawyer was on for Light of the Jedi. We had to have them back. Unfortunately, Jay Stoops couldn't make it for this one, but we still have delightful guests. Fern and Sawyer, introduce yourselves. Where can people find you?
Hey, I'm Fern. You can find me on TikTok at fernamg.
Hi, my name is Sawyer. I'm sawyeurism on TikTok and Instagram. And I'm so excited to be back for this next book in the series. I'm so honored that you guys had me back for this. I'm very, very excited to get into the meat of this story.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Before we get to the brass tacks of the topic at hand, let's go around the room with our first impressions of this book, the non-spoilery rundown. I have an idea as to what Fern is going to say, but Choco, let's get this ball rolling. What did you think of Into the Dark?
Tarkin has been my favorite book in canon for a very long time, and this has finally supplanted it. This book really goes into the depths of character development, which is something Claudia Gray has always exceeded at. But we really get a great look into each of these Jedi, why they're here, what they want, what their goals and dreams are. And not just them. We go into, she made me love a rock.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that his stoic expression said all that needed to be said and stuff like, you're like, what? It's excellent. I highly recommend this book. It is my current favorite in canon. So
this was my first Claudia Gray book, and I had high expectations because you both have been praising this woman since I've known you. I was not disappointed. This book was very different from Light of the Jedi, but in a phenomenal way. It was a wonderful addition, I would almost call it a compliment more than like a sequel to this book, the former book. But I loved getting to know these characters on a really intimate level, and I just, now that we have quite a bit of time before the next High Republic book, I'm definitely going to use it to read all the other Claudia Gray novels.
Yeah, I mean, my review is read this book. It's excellent. it really gave me everything I wanted, and things that I've been looking to see from the Star Wars canon for a long time, the types of characters I've been very interested in seeing and we haven't really gotten a ton of in the past. And yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, Claudia Gray is the master of character development. She introduces so many characters in this book, and sometimes that can be a little dangerous because it can be hard to develop them all and flesh them all out, and yet she absolutely succeeds in that. I felt like I knew each of these characters, and I loved them all.
Absolutely. And if you guys aren't following Fern or Sawyer on TikTok, please do so. And especially, to give context around Fern's disposition right now, her latest review or non-spoiler review of Into the Dark is read this book, or I'll let her do it.
Read this book. Read this book.
Everyone is absolutely correct. When I first read Light of the Jedi, that was my top canon book, and I was ready for Claudia Gray to dethrone that immediately, and I was happy to be not disappointed. As everyone has said, this is a masterclass in character development. And, it's very easy to dive into characters and get lost in the humdrum of of the usual tropes of character development, but with Claudia Gray and the way she writes her characters, and especially in this book, you know, we get to meet characters who are wildly different from each other, but also kind of show us a space that we weren't prepared or we weren't expecting to see. Just a brief example before we go into the spoilers. We don't know about, you know, this guild that one of the characters are a part of. We don't know about this new Wayseeker that they're introducing in the Jedi Order, and we also never really explored scholarship in the Jedi Order. Like, everything has always been, you know, seeking wisdom in the Force or seeking combat prowess, you know, martial discipline with lightsaber dueling. And now, like, just broad spectrum, we're seeing people who are just interested in learning about local culture and art and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the Force, although it is like kind of, they're connected in a way where you don't see it, but they're still not focused on learning about the Force. And in a lot of ways, the character in this one in particular, the way he talks about art and tapestries and learning about culture reminded me so much of Thrawn. And I was like, yes, there's more people like this who love to learn and can deduce so much information from that stuff. So yeah, Claudia Gray is definitely, you know, she is a brilliant mind when it comes to giving us characters we never thought we wanted, and characters that we will eventually fall in love with. And to echo something that Choco said, it made me love a rock. And I wrote it in the show notes too, and I'm pretty sure as he read that note, he was like, yep, I love the rock. And also, if you're not following Choco, I don't know why, but go watch his meme video. You will, if you read this book, you will know exactly which video I'm referring to.
We want to show on a show of hands, out of 10, our thoughts. I mean, for me, I have to say,
For me, it's a 9 out of 10 because nothing is a 10 for me.
I would agree, but I don't have fractional fingers. But yeah.
What are your guys' ratings?
I'll go with an 8, which I think is where Light of the Jedi was at as well.
Nice.
It's a 10 out of 10 for me. Because everything, no, that's not true. Everything is not a 10 out of 10 for me, but I am predisposed to love stories, and this one I loved even more than I'm used to. So definitely a 10 out of 10.
So let's get straight into our spoiler discussion on Into the Dark. We're going to start with part 1, the Great Disaster, onto the Amaxine Station. So just start the conversation off, Fern, like some of the things that stood out to you in this part.
I was so excited to meet Reith Silas because he is training to be an archivist, and I have wanted a story about a Jedi archivist for at least 5 or 6 years now, probably before that, but I didn't know that was what I wanted yet.
Yeah.
And then there came a point where I was actively writing stories about these types of characters because I wanted to see them. And to finally have this character who is dedicated and driven and not very strong in the Force, but he makes up for it with his hard work, with his persistence. I just instantly fell in love. I just instantly knew that I would adore this character, and that held strong throughout the entire book.
Absolutely. And it kind of makes you think, hey, the only story we have on archivists is Jocasta New's kind of like semi-cameo in the Darth Vader comics.
Something kind of on a similar note, the characters that we are introduced to in this first part of the book, is specifically the Jedi. All 3 of them are imperfect examples of Jedi. And along that line, they're also just very, very unique in comparison to really any of the Jedi that we meet in the Light of the Jedi. You know, and we're introduced to, yes, we have this archivist, and we also have this idea of a Wayseeker, which is something that we haven't seen before, and this idea that a Jedi can leave the Order to kind of discover their own path in the Force, and I thought that was so interesting. I think I really connected with Orla in particular. Reith, when I was getting to know Reith, I kind of felt like I had no choice but to compare him a bit to Bell, because that's the Padawan we follow in Light of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And they're both on a similar path, because they're both Padawans edging towards earning knighthood, but they're following completely different paths and have completely different outlooks on what it means to be a Jedi, and what their relationship to the Force is like. And that contrast was so beautiful to me. And then we have the crew of the vessel, which, right off the bat is not what you might be expecting, but at the same time very Star Wars in that sense. And for the most of the first part of the book, I was really just like, well, not just the first part, the entire part. Is this a rock? Is it an alien? Is it a rock? Like,
it's a Vintian.
I think we can all agree that we love Geode. He is the best. But that was a really enjoyable part of the first bit. And then just the whole thing with one thing that I kind of, it took me a minute to figure out the placement of the story, and then they went into hyperspace and the great disaster happened. And so I think I was talking to you about this a bit, Element, but I felt like I was in this like godlike position that made me really uncomfortable, because I knew what was happening, and I knew, at the mention of who Reith's master was, and I just felt so bad because I knew all these horrible things. But at the same time, it made it that much cooler to see their perspective from what was going on, because it was taking place at the exact same time.
With this first part, I mean, again, we get to see a lot of cool stuff, but there's so many small little nuggets that we can pull out about the Jedi Order itself that was just, I don't know, it was very special and unique. There's a lot of false assumptions based off of the Jedi, and I made a video where I said the Jedi aren't wrong, you just have a complicated relationship with religion. And I got a lot of responses to that, but because so many people think like, oh, if you don't follow the council, then what happens?
I feel like Fern wants to chime in.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that is exactly my take. And I was so excited when this concept of the Wayseeker was introduced, because it proves exactly that you're not bound to the council necessarily. They are an authority figure within this organization, but many religions have authority figures within their organizations. Mm-hmm. People have individual, positive or negative relationships with those authority figures. But that's a very individual experience. I have so many thoughts about the Jedi as a religion, as a religious organization. And I thought we got to see that in such wonderful detail in this book.
Yeah, like there's so many awesome little parts where you find out that to be a Jedi, no, you don't have to be celibate. No, you don't have to strictly adhere to everything that the council says. A lot of people disagree with the council. Disagreeing with them doesn't make you a gray Jedi, because that's not a thing. Sorry, anyone that's watching. I always hammer on that, because it's we get in order where we have so many more people that are Qui-Gon like, where their understanding of the Force is unique, and their coming together as a group is based off of principle, not off of these hard fast rules or anything like that. And so I love getting into that and seeing the different paths that you can take. Someone becoming a Jedi, one's trying to become a Wayseeker, the other wants to be an archivist. One just goes around and talks to people about their local legends and stuff like that, and finds that's so cool. And some of them seek adventures, some of them don't. It's just really fascinating to kind of get this bigger look, as well as we are always coming at it from the perspective of those coming from the core outward, you know. But when they meet, you know, the people on the ship, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, you guys are from the frontier," and they're like, "I mean, we don't call it the frontier, but." And you're like, "Oh man, yeah, all of my stuff is framed through this small window, and everyone else has their own perspectives." It was refreshing to get to really see that, and how irritated they are. Of like, have you heard of the Force? Yes, we all know about the Force. Shut up, like you aren't special. You know, I don't know. It's just really cool.
Geode vacantly stares in agreement. But yeah, like in terms of like celibacy and the forming of attachments with the Jedi Order, it's particularly interesting to see how Reith kind of handles that situation. And I think this is primarily why people are so kind of confounded by this concept, because there exists a very fine line that Master Jorah had given him. But he's just like, I don't want to do this, so we're just going to say, yes, we're monks. And so, like, yeah, the galaxy at large may, if they don't choose to, like, elaborate on their stance on sex and attachment, are going to believe that they are celibate monks, and they're just not doing it. But, like, you know, real Avaros is hitting things, and there's Jedi out there who's just like, you know, I think... for some people, it may seem like it very like floozy, but it's a great guard against attachment, against the things that make you fall into fear of loss, and just the fear leading to anger. Anger leads to suffering, or something like that. Hatred. But we also get now I want to cover this one particularly like all in one go, because it's like interspersed throughout the book. But Comac and Orla's flashback 25 years to Adam Erono Crisis. Choco, get us started on this conversation. Like, what is the importance of showing this crisis from Comac and Orla's perspective, and how does it like kind of dovetail into their character arcs in the book?
Yeah, it was really interesting to show that these characters had a history, because we have one where, you know, her goal is to become a way seeker, and she's going to be leaving. She's going to be buying her own ship and doing her own thing, and it's because of her disagreements with the council. She's going to seek her own relationship with the Force. Versus Comac, who is seemingly the exact opposite of that. But once we get into, you know, kind of what caused their schism, or what they believe to be their own trajectories, we get some interesting insight that maybe it's actually the opposite way around. You know, just because we think we want something does not necessarily mean that that's what we want. And it really brings up just, I don't know, the flaws in our own psyches that are just characteristic of being people, where you may think that this is what you want and it's not, or you may be lying to yourself, or holding yourself back, or, you know, having cognitive dissonance with something you've experienced and unable to move forward with it. But yeah, we flash back 25 years to a rescue mission where they were really drawn into a trap and didn't know it, didn't see that it was coming, and had to come ahead with whether to trust your instincts or trust the direction of those above you. Plays out interestingly.
What was interesting to me about these flashbacks is that from a narrative perspective, usually we expect that if a story is going to be told non-chronologically, as this one is, we get these flashbacks to 25 years earlier. I I don't know if this is what I expected, but I think it's common to expect that somehow these plots are going to be deeply related in some way. Oh, it turns out the big bad from this flashback is also the big bad from this current plot line we're experiencing. But this book is so character driven, and this story is relevant. Yes, there are some similarities, some parallels between what happens 25 years ago and what is happening today. But it's the effect that those events had on Comac and on Orla. That's the reason we need this story. We need this story in order to understand who they are and where they are in their lives and how they have been affected by this very traumatic thing that happened to them. It was the story that, Claudia Gray chose to tell us, the story of 25 years ago, their first mission together. And I think it was absolutely necessary for us to understand these characters and their paths through the Force.
No, I agree. I mean, it made perfect sense to me why we were getting this story, and I really liked that we, in some ways, Comac and Orla reminded me of Ava and Elza. Not in the same way, because I didn't get, romance vibes from these guys, but they grew up together and they had this moment where we didn't get a look into Ava and Elza's life together as Padawans, but we did here, and it makes perfect sense because we have these two Jedi who are really questioning their relationship with the Force, and that's considered unusual. So we need to know why they are at that point, and clearly it had to be some kind of catalyst that affected them really deeply. Side note, I had never heard of Philithars before, and yeah, he died right at the beginning of that story, but I just think it's so cool that there's a snake species that can be a Jedi. I'm a herpetologist, that's what I do at university, so I was like, hell yeah. And I kind of, I really liked the way that we transitioned into those moments, because we didn't get the full story. It took the whole book to get to the full story, and Claudia Gray did such a fantastic job of putting the right moral of the story in each section of the book, it was just a unique thing to add. And I think that yes, there were some similarities to what was going on, but I also think it was an interesting juxtaposition because Reath was going through his own, crisis where he was questioning his relationship with the Force. And so I think that was, he didn't even get to hear this story. This was not a story that he got to hear. Yeah. This was a story we got to hear, but it almost feels like the intention was to compare not just the two of them, but to Reath as well.
Absolutely. And just general housekeeping, I do want to reiterate, if someone says something that really piques your mojo and you're like, just do it, just come in. This is still a very conversational podcast. So I'm trying to kind of proctor speakers just so we're not speaking over each other, but still interrupt us if you want to say something.
Special main element.
Yeah.
Interrupt us directly. Oops, I meant to do like that.
But yeah. So yeah, this part is one of my favorite parts of this book, seemingly because it's actually a misdirect, because we at the very beginning were let in on this notion that Orla and Comac are using this sort of assignment to bring things full circle, to go back to where it began and see where it leads them on their journey. And we learn in this story that Orla is, having trouble trusting her instincts, or contending with trusting her instincts and trusting her master. Comac is having just lost his, is completely disillusioned with how the Jedi Order, pretends to create attachments and then discourage said attachments, and he gets very angry about it. And and then like later on in the book when we'll get to it, after this flashback, you kind of see how they still haven't come full circle. They're still continuing from 25 years ago, where Orla is still contending with her instincts, and Comac is still contending with his beef with the Jedi Order and just their teachings. So this was an interesting part. I thought, at the outset that this flashback was going to lend context to where they are now, but no, it just lent like reinforcement to where they still are today, and they still haven't gotten out of it. And some other moments that stood out. We can finally say that Elsewhere from Rise of Kylo Ren is the Amaxine station. For the longest time, especially when Light of the Jedi came out, I was like, oh, Starlight Beacon, it has biospheres. Maybe that's like it broken apart. But no, they described Elsewhere, detail for detail, ring for ring, and I was just like, this is it. This is our connection to the sequels. I mean, granted, we had Avar Kriss and Loden in holocrons in the sequels, but this is a great connection, and it also opens up a whole new can of worms from Light of the Jedi, which we will touch on in a bit later. I do want your guys' opinions on Comac's Chris Angel moment, his mind freak, when everyone was, getting rowdy and trying to steal everybody's resources and supplies, and he just rises and just says, "Hear me." Choco, what's up? What's up with this moment, man?
Well, I mean, just real quick, I do want to harken back to Elsewhere, where Snoke asks Kylo Ren, or Ben at this moment, "Do you like this place, Ben?" He says, "It's interesting." He says it was built by people who were trying to hold back the dark. That was the entire point, to create an oasis of light in their great shadow. You see how well it worked. And I don't know, I love that kind of imagery, because we see, the goal was to hold back this darkness, and did it work? We'll get into that. But having that as just like a little small nugget playing in the back of my head, and it giving me this visual of it was just awesome. But yeah, so the ability to levitate, it's fascinating, because we saw Rey do it in Rise of Skywalker, but it's something that we've always kind of wondered about, because we've seen certain people capable of it throughout Legends and the comics. Carrick and Fila did it. And we find out that Leia could do it. Leia had an easier time levitating than she did doing one-handed handstands while holding things, because Luke was trying to treat her like Yoda treated him. But I don't know, it's just an interesting moment where we find out that it's a semi-unique ability. It comes naturally to some. It's very difficult for others, which also lends itself to the individuality of each person and their relationship to the Force, which is just really cool. But the reaction of the pirates, though, was just great. Of like, I mean, what would you do if you're like, yeah. I don't know about you guys. I'm gonna listen to that guy in the sky, because that ain't right. I don't know.
That was kind of like a deific moment right there for him.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought.
No, but I do
Comac
love how you
has
call
that
it
effect.
No, I do love how you call it the Chris Angel moment, because yeah, it was definitely a mind freak. You picture being like, I'm at this Vegas casino and I'm gonna levitate over this pool. I mean, my mind went to Chris Angel first, and then it went to Job in Arrested Development, which is a slightly lesser magician. But yeah, I'm curious if you had any thoughts on it, Fern.
It was an incredibly cool moment, of course. I wrote something in the margins like, oh dang, what's he doing? Which is my reaction to many moments like this. Yeah, I want to return to what you were saying earlier about different, I guess proclivities is not the right word, but some Jedi are better at some Force abilities than others. And I have this theory that I have mentioned before, that Star Wars at the end of the day is just all about teaching. Every Star Wars story is about teaching. And this is something we're told in teacher school, that ability at the end of the day is not something that really matters. That there are people who have certain abilities, maybe the ability to grasp mathematical concepts a little quicker, a little more naturally, or the ability to write a story in a way that feels more natural to them. But at the end of the day, with effort, with perseverance, with a growth mindset, the person who is initially less able to do that thing can become even better than the person who had natural aptitude for it. We see a moment like that, I think, with Wreath a little later on. So I like that you pointed out that this is an ability that comes naturally to some and not to others, can be learned or maybe can't, because I think it ties back into, like, the Jedi are taught a lot of the things they're able to do. A lot of it is also instinct, as we see with Orla.
Yeah. And, it goes into like how we all often misconceive how the Force is. Like, a lot of people will go into Star Wars thinking that there are certain abilities only masters can do. But, given all of the information we know from canon, how Luke describes, M counts or midichlorians don't make you more powerful. It's your doors more open than others, but eventually you can get there too. So it's not like, I hate to say it, it's not like it made Anakin on like an unreachable peak. It was just, he was there when he woke up. He woke up on top of the peak. We get some tidbits about the mind tricks too. Some people are just very persuasive, as they are in real life. They are persuasive. That means the mind trick's going to work easily for them. Sawyer, did you have any thoughts on this moment?
Yeah, one thing that we hadn't really covered, something that I've been thinking about while we were talking about this particular event, is I find it sort of ironic that Comac did this grand gesture of forcibility and everyone was like, oh my god. But then Leox does something where he just, strolls in and is very calm about it, and he's like, okay guys, let's just focus on the good, and it's the same effect, but completely different scale. But yeah, no, this kind of comes back to Light of the Jedi in the sense that in both of these books we get these very unique displays of the Force that we haven't really seen before, which was one of my favorite parts of Light of the Jedi. So it was really nice to see that continue, as well as, like we've already said, the discussion of not everyone can do everything, which I think more people need to understand, to be honest with you, because I think that it's a common misconception that everyone, can just do everything. Especially with like stuff like Force lightning. Like, I've gotten into plenty of arguments with people who think that you can just do whatever if you are a Force user, which is not the case. It was a great kind of, like you said, a deific moment for him, and it was quite amusing, especially because, like, at that point we were all especially irritated with these people who were causing so much havoc on the station. So it was kind of like, yes, get him.
Yeah, and as we always say, the Force is intuitive first, technical later. But non sequitur, I noticed something about Choco that is quite astounding.
What could that be?
Small little plug here. That is the new Dyad in the Force shirt. Can you show us the back?
Perhaps.
There you go. Okay, so yes, that is. I guess I can put a link on this episode. Y'all can get your own Dyad in the Force shirts, hoodies, and sweaters. There's a
you
catch.
can only buy the Choco ones.
Well, no, that is a lie.
Just for that, I'm gonna buy the Element one.
Yes. So okay. First of all, I appreciate that. Second of all, yeah, that is the catch. You can support the show. You know, whatever you buy will support the show. I will kick all of the proceeds to Choco for all of those shirts. And for all of my shirts, I will keep the money. But everything supports the show, you know. But this is just a nice little fun way of kind of like creating like a Civil War moment. Like how many Darth Choco shirts are going to be out there? How many Elements?
Team Choco.
Bought my shirt. I can't wait to get it.
Ooh, which one did you? Oh, I'll let you do an unboxing.
We'll have to wait.
Okay. So yeah, link will be in the description if you want to get your Element 7 shirt.
Choco shirt.
So real quick, let's also touch on this before we move on to part 2. Affy finds some very interesting information on this station. She comes from the Bind Guild, and she was adopted by Scover Bind, the leader of this guild, who is like kind of like an outer rim fleet transport, and they were the purveyors of the Legacy Run as well. Sawyer, like what does this actually mean for the overall story with you know Affy discovering these smuggler codes, or at least discovering the larger role that her guild that she was a part of played in this pivotal Maxine station?
Well, it certainly added to the mystery because we weren't sure exactly what the station. I mean, we really weren't sure until the very, very end. Like, what is the true origin and purpose of this station? So it certainly added to the mystery of that. But it also gave Affy her own journey of kind of. I mean, she's not a Jedi, she's not contemplating her place with the Force, her relationship with the Force, but she is kind of, you know, starting to question who she is as well. Every single character in this book really goes through that same journey. So that was really important for her to discover. But, you know, for her part, I really felt like in her particular case, we weren't able to make any decisions about this character. We were just as blindsided as she was, you know. Even Leox didn't fully know what was going on. He kind of, towards the middle of the book, we kind of find out that he does know some things that she doesn't. But this journey for her was, you know, as much a mystery to her as it was to us, which I really appreciated, because I really had no idea where that was going until, you know, she finally was able to find out in that hotel room on Coruscant. So, yeah, I mean, and I think that I guess I wasn't sure how, you know, I had no experience with Claudia Gray. I did not know what she would do with a group of so many different characters. So, I'm glad that she found such a unique purpose for Affy, and I loved getting to know her. But yeah, no, I really found myself just kind of asking more questions than finding answers the more we found out about these symbols that were left around the station and what that might mean for the guild. I did appreciate that connection that the Legacy Run was part of the Bind Guild. I thought that was a really cool tie back, and just kind of almost, even though by the end of Light of the Jedi, we know what happened there, it just kind of felt like we were just adding more details to that and really shaping it into what it was and feeling the full effect of it as well. Because that was really, it was a disaster that the aftermath affected the whole galaxy, but really was caused by a lot of the galaxy at the same time. So yeah, I mean, and I didn't I nothing could have really prepared me. I had no idea where that storyline was going until the very end, which I thought was really awesome because I was able to kind of make connections about, you know, what was happening in the 25 years ago story and where things were going to go with Wreath and stuff. But with Affy, it was, you know, all mystery until the very end.
Absolutely. And I want to get your take, Fern, especially because this is something that Claudia does. You know, seemingly Affy, Leox, and Geode are just their transport, right? But everyone has stakes, or everyone is involved in some way, shape, or form with this station, and everyone's story revolves around it, and they're all intertwined. What did you think about this particular, you know, angle for Affy and the vessel crew?
I mean, Affy is such an incredible character, and that goes for all of these characters. Like, you could introduce anyone and my response would be, oh, they're such an incredible character. But Affy especially is in this moment in her life where she's having this kind of in many ways tragic loss of innocence moment. She's realizing that she cannot trust the woman who raised her for much of her life. She has this complicated sense of loyalty to her biological parents who she remembers and loves, and her foster mother who took her in. And I was interested in this relationship from the very beginning because I really like the found family trope. Yeah. And so when Affy was introduced as this character who has this foster mother, she has this sense of pride when Leox refers to Scover as her mother. I was already invested in this relationship and excited to see where it would go. And it develops in a way that's, again, very tragic, but so complex, so nuanced, so interesting. And Affy has to make a really difficult call at the end of this arc. I don't know if we're ready to talk about it now or if we want to wait until a little later, but I love the decision she makes.
Yeah, I mean, these characters give us this, like, we had this refreshing crew, because I can't say that I've read a lot of Star Wars books, right? I am over 200 at this point. And I can't say that I've met anyone like any of those characters.
I mean, Leox could be Nico Okar to some degree.
I was just going to say, now that I'm thinking about it, she kind of, Affy reminds me just a little bit, based on her circumstances, of Mission Vow, but I also can't do a podcast without mentioning the old Republic.
And that's fair.
But there are similarities.
I don't see Mission personally, with Special Mission's relationship with her brother. I guess you're trying to say that's similar to her relationship with the mom, but even then, it's still very different. They have different motivations and goals as well as trajectories. And I do love Nico Okar, and but even in this captain with his, he is our second ace character in the Star Wars universe next to Vi Murati, and he just has this oddly spiritual way of seeing the world around him. That's not based on the Force or anything like that. Like he's just this weird hippie dude that is also kind of a cowboy at the same time. And he's just very interesting. And we've definitely not had anyone like Geode before. Geode's always holding it down with his stoicism and very dry humor. I hear he's a wild man, but when you need it, he's solid for sure.
Rock solid.
Solid as a rock. Since we're getting to spend some time with these characters, it really opens up this world and this time period, because these guys are coming from the opposite end. They see something like Coruscant, and it's not meant with awe, it's meant with skepticism. Like, being outside feels like it's inside, and it's weird, and I hate it, and why is it so loud, and I want to go home. I don't know, I just really enjoyed the characters, and I don't know how we keep getting such unique individuals, but I'm here for it, and I'll always be here for it. Especially when you have someone that like Affy, who is she's trying to prove herself, right? Because she has this automatic leg up being the adopted daughter of the owner, but she doesn't want to rely on that, and she's proving herself and doing her own thing, and proving that independence, much in the same way that the captain is also trying to prove his independence from the guild by just being an individual and how he sees the world. And then Geode's one of a kind. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
I just love that one moment where they're talking about celibacy and sex, and Leox is like, listen, don't tell anybody I was the one you talked to about this. And it's true, because she's still very young. I think she at the point of the story, she's 17, but she became like, the guild's sort of prospective heir when she was 14 or very, very young. And everyone's just kind of coming to a head in this kind of story where they all are destined to intertwine in some way, shape, or form. All right, so before we head into part 2, let's do a little lightning round, go around the room. The death of Daz Ryden. How did you feel? How did it make you feel? Of course, we all know what happens, but when you read about that, what were you thinking, Fern?
I didn't buy it 100%. I felt sort of it could go either way. For some reason, and Wreath sort of picks up on like this, the circumstances are mysterious. There is no body. It happens very suddenly. He thinks that maybe things are not as they seem. And I felt similarly, like maybe things are not as they seem here. But also I had a very emotional reaction to that moment, because just a few pages earlier, Wreath has this moment where he's like, I'm on an adventure with Des. This is wonderful. Like, my friends back home would be so jealous if they knew that this is what I was doing. And it's this very tender moment that I really related to. I feel like I've been in that position before. And so to go from, oh, this is so heartwarming, this is so wonderful, he's seeing this mentor and someone a little closer in age to him. And then to go to, and there's no body, he's gone, he's been vaporized and turned to atoms, was like a pretty drastic jump. So I didn't buy it, but I definitely felt that gut reaction of just, oh no.
Yeah, I definitely had a gut reaction. I mean, I feel like coming from Light of the Jedi, we were all trained to expect that and nothing. So I was like, yeah, I guess that's par for the course for High Republic. He's gone. Sawyer, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, no, total opposite from Fern. I bought it immediately because of Light of the Jedi. I just, I'm so used to reading like 3 pages and the character just dies. So I was convinced, and it made me very uncomfortable because I had to think about like the science of this guy just being vaporized, and just the way that it was written was very eerie and yes, random, but like I said, I had come to expect that, and to be honest with you, I would have almost preferred it stayed that way, because I really, as much as it sucked to like feel, I really liked that about Light of the Jedi, its ability to get you to attach to a character and then kill them off immediately afterwards. So part of me kind of wanted it to stay that way, just so there was one part of the book where I was like absolutely devastated and like had to take a step back and be like, oh, okay, keep going.
So you're saying you hate joy. Gotcha. I understand. I
mean, to an extent, that is, I mean, I would agree to an extent. I do think that Claudia was trying to give us a break here. I think we lost way too many people with we are all the and then flames and nothing. And then we like, this was kind of the same way with Daz, just and like a spark of light and then nothing. And when Wreath was bringing up all of these things pointing to how this stuff just doesn't look like it could have worked in the way that it did, then yeah, I was on the same track as Fern. But Choco, what about you?
I did believe it. I definitely bought it because of how it was explained. Like all of a sudden the thing's locked. It's a blinding light. Once he finally enters, it's just a room. There's nowhere he could have gone, you know? So yeah, I definitely bought it. I'm glad it didn't stick. Not because I am not ready to face, you know, the death of these amazing characters, but because of what information he came back with and how it developed our antagonists. Well, some of the antagonists going forward. But yeah, no, that it came out of nowhere though. That's the part that hit me. Is they're just like, oh, exploring. What's this? Goodbye. What? No.
All right, so let's go to part 2 of the book, which is their journey or return to Coruscant. They got what they needed. They have found idols that were meant to, in their mind, that were meant to seal the dark within them. And so they have concluded that they need to bring it back and they need to cleanse these idols. And they, on their return back to Coruscant, they have to rescue the journeyman. Fern, what jumps out at you in this part?
I did not fully understand the necessity of this scene, and maybe you guys have a take or a perspective that will change my mind, but it felt a little unnecessary. It felt like we needed action in that scene, and so we got action. We needed some sort of distraction from, I don't know. Actually, I don't even know if that's the case. Yeah. I wasn't exactly sure. I loved this moment where they rescue a Wookiee baby. That was really adorable.
Yeah.
And I love, obviously, it's an opportunity to demonstrate this sort of heroism that is inherent to the Jedi. They see someone in trouble, they have to help. Other than that, I wasn't entirely sure why this scene was included, especially at this moment.
I'm kind of in the same boat. It wasn't necessary. However, I will say it is important that we do get things that are not necessarily necessary, because it throws you off the scent. You know what I mean? It's if there's nothing, if everything is only moving the story forward, then we wouldn't get great misdirects like the death of Des, you know, certain things like that. So saving a Wookiee baby is adorable, though. I will say that. Yeah.
I kind of agree, but I kind of disagree in the sense that I don't like the way that the scene was written so much. But knowing the chaos and the uncertainty that the Great Disaster caused, it does kind of make sense to me why this happened, because literally the entire galaxy was just in absolute chaos after the Legacy Run disaster. So to me, them stopping, you know, knowing what we know about the Jedi in this era from Light of the Jedi, it makes sense that their first instinct is, okay, we got to go help these people. It did fit its purpose in the story for me, because of the complete and utter, we don't know what to do with this incredible disaster, and also we don't know what caused this incredible disaster. It did make sense to me why they made the stop and did that, and I'm not going to complain about the Wookiee baby.
No one is. No one is.
No, of course not. I think we're all in agreement there. But I do, like I said, it was written kind of weird. Like, they had that moment where Comac was like, oh no, am I going to get trapped on here? And then the next time we saw him, he was already on the vessel. Like, just stuff like that. I don't think the way it was written kind of made it seem awkward, but I think it served its purpose.
Yeah, I would agree to a degree. It's definitely like there some instances where it's a little bit unnecessary, but some instances where it's kind of needed. But you know, no matter how you feel about this part, it doesn't make it any less beautiful. But we do, on the way, you know, start to witness the rising darkness in Comac. He is showing a lot of darkness. You know, as they were on the Maxine station, we got to see Orla and Comax's visions when they were, you know, feeling this sort of formless or amorphous darkness that they couldn't really, you know, pinpoint. And it just it's weird to see someone who kind of comes off very stalwart, but also shows so much like reticence and shaky ground in his resolve. Choco, what did you think about Comax Rising Darkness and like when they returned to the Jedi Temple with the Masters and stuff?
It was fascinating. I mean, especially after having, you know, the scene with him and the idol prior to this. It really leaves things open-ended and mysterious. You don't know exactly what's going on. You do know that as a person, he just kind of the kind of adventure that he's craved or enjoys, and how that could potentially lead to a darker place. But yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting turn that we can kind of see. We can see wheels turning, and especially with this interplay with the historical story, you start to unravel these things. But again, you know, Claudia does a great job of leaving it as a mystery, not giving you all the pieces just yet. It gives you just enough pieces that you have almost everything you need, but not the next piece that will identify what the whole thing is.
Comac is such an interesting character to me because there are things you might expect about him when you first meet him that turn out to not be true. And the book takes note of this. They say, you know, he's a mystic and yet he's deeply logical. He really values reason. To call him calculating maybe has too much of a negative connotation. But again, he is logical. He's grounded in theory. We see that in reality, he's very deeply tied to his emotions, in a way that we see is maybe not very healthy. He seems to have put a lot of stock in the idea that to be a good Jedi, he needs to repress his emotions. He needs to repress his grief. He literally says he needs to bottle up that grief. And now, 25 years later, of course, he is sort of seeing the effects of that repression. He no longer can continue to function this way. And I feel the same way about Orla. I think these are two characters who, if you approach them from a very superficial level, you expect them to be one way, and yet they defy those expectations constantly.
Absolutely. Sawyer?
So Comac for me was the most difficult character to figure out. I still don't fully understand him, and I don't think we were supposed to. I think that was left intentional. And, you know, his relationship with his emotions felt very dangerous to me, only in the sense that I totally agree with him, but that was hearing his story, his part of the story from 25 years back, and his relationship with his emotions and his relationship with the Order. It was the first negative feeling I had about the Jedi in this era. Because in Light of the Jedi, we were introduced to a bunch of Qui-Gons who, you know, are the Jedi that we, you know, they should be. You know, there's no corruption, there's no political influence. This was the first time, or Comac as a character was the first time that I started to go, okay, so maybe there are some Jedi here who are approaching this the wrong way, because he shouldn't be feeling that, you know? And somehow something went wrong for him to feel like he has to, you know, feel it, not feel, essentially. It made me kind of be concerned for him, honestly, because I think he's a really interesting character, and I was quite surprised the way that his story ended up. But it does leave me curious about his future, because those are dangerous signs, and I don't think it's his fault at all, but I don't know. It made me really question him as a character, and I wonder about his future more than his present, I would say.
Yeah, I think the cracks are starting to show, right? In Light of the Jedi, we had a lot of Jedi who were Qui-Gons, free thinkers, independent thinkers, and creative thinkers who were just able to improvise like right then and there and not really be bogged down by, the dogma that everyone is so kind of attached to. And then we get our first Jedi here who are, they don't have that ability. They don't have that that kind of wherewithal to be very critical and think for themselves. They're very much attached to the rules and the doctrine that is the Jedi Order, and largely that has something to do with their masters and their teachings, but it shows where the kind of dichotomy lies with these Jedi. Like, where did they go wrong, and where were they supposed to go? So we have like Avar and Elzar and all of those Jedi who resemble Qui-Gon. And then we have these Jedi in this story who are all just really racking their brains with all of these questions that any Jedi would be racking their brains with, because it is a tough situation to be in. And to get to a place where Avar and Elzar are in terms of like being secure in their own bodies, being secure with how they perceive the Force and how they perceive the Order, and just being able to, make those executive decisions on their own. There's just like, no, the Order is wrong here. Let's do this. Like, especially from Light of the Jedi, when she says, we're going to listen to the will of the Force. And if people die, so be it, but we're going to try anyway. So let's talk about the return to the Jedi Temple, the return to Coruscant. We're starting to see the aftermath of the Great Disaster. The hospitals are full. They have to, upon landing, go around and help the medical droids dispense with medical attention, from there to the idol cleansing underneath the Jedi Temple. Choco, get us started, because I know you have something you want to touch on here in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I loved this portion, because they bring these idols in, and we finally get canon confirmation from what we knew from legends about the Jedi Temple being built over this Sith shrine, and this dark side nexus, and how, which leads to a whole bunch of other questions. How did it get there? Who built this? The Sith ran Coruscant before the Jedi. There's just a lot of there's a lot of pieces to this, but I do love how they had figured out how to use this nexus for these dark side artifacts in order to negate their dark side influence by using that dark side nexus. And then it makes perfect sense of why that stuff, they would have that stuff stored there. I don't know, it brought into light a lot of things from legends, but did so in a way that was just perfect. I was a big fan of this, and a bunch of these small touches on history. We didn't even mention the Maxine warriors yet, but that's a whole I love it. I thought it was really cool.
First of all, hearing about all the hospitals full, that was, a little bit too close to the times.
Yeah.
I would like I guess the cleansing of the idols. I did find all of that lore really interesting, but it didn't. I think that I was more focused on Wreath's section of this part. we know going in, like right off the bat, that his master does not survive Light of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been wondering, throughout this whole point, how is he going to find this out? And I assumed it was going to be this grand gesture from the council. They were going to invite him in and they were going to be like, I'm so sorry, your master died. But it's really as casual as this medical droid being like, oh, she's dead. And he has to deal with that. It's so blunt, and it's, he doesn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it either. It just, it's so quick. And he, whereas we have Affy wondering if her mother was alive the whole time, Reith has pretty much no doubt in his mind that his master is okay. He does obviously have doubts because he asks the droid, but he does not expect her to be dead. And I think there was just a certain bluntness to it that, it didn't even allow him to... There was no preparation for that, and I can't decide if that was better or worse for him, because then he goes and he has, he tries to... He hurts that poor training droid because he tries to get it off his mind, and, he, gets moved into a different part of the temple, like his quarters get moved, and it's all just so very fast-paced for him, and he doesn't even really get the opportunity to, deal with it, which is just an added frustration, because he this whole time has been thinking about her teachings, trying to make sense of what she'd been telling him with the Kyber Arch, and also writing this crazy voice message that's like, blah blah blah, all this crazy stuff happened on the station, I learned a lesson, please never let me do this again, and obviously he deletes it. But so I just, obviously it was very intentional the way that he found that out, but that is the part of this story that stuck out, or of this section that really stuck out to me, and I think it was very, very important to his character arc.
He also scaled or crossed the Kyber Arch alone, or did he? That was the lesson, right? Fern, what about you?
Yeah, well, I agree with Sawyer that moment in the overcrowded hospital where, everyone is just reacting to this galaxy-wide emergency that has just occurred hit way too close to home, felt very relevant. And I don't know what the timeline for publication was with this book, but I almost wonder if that was something that was, if not added, if it was adjusted for this sort of current moment that we're living in. But yeah, I mean, there's that very cliche line you read sometimes of a character letting out a breath they didn't know they were holding. And that's what it felt like waiting for Reith to find out about Jorah's death. I knew it was coming. I didn't know when he would find out. And when he does find out, I let out this breath I didn't know I was holding. I really felt for him in that moment, especially because we do see that message he thinks about sending to her and doesn't. I went back to check because I was thinking, does he have any communication with her after that first chapter on Coruscant? And we know that there are a few weeks, I think, in between that and when he leaves for the station, but we don't get to see them interact at all, and we won't see them interact beyond just that first chapter.
We do get some voices in his head from her.
Right. Yeah, and those are great moments. But it's just very sad that he never calls her. He never writes to her. Obviously, because he's in the middle of this, adventure, and he's in the middle of this mission. He's in the middle of making sure he and the people around him are safe. I really love the scene where he scales the Kyber Arch, and on the other side of it, he says he feels further from the Force than ever before. This is meant to be a meditative process, and we're told very early on that only really only Jedi who feel called to do it attempt it. It's not something that many Jedi try. And I don't know if he's called to do it in this moment. I think he's trying to prove a point. I think he's angry or resentful or frustrated. And at the end, it doesn't help him to understand the Force better. It just makes him feel all the more isolated and divided from it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of like, reinforced by the riddle that Jorah gives him. Like, why can't you cross it alone? And when he crosses it alone and he distances himself from the Force, you're kind of like, that was the point. And we'll touch on that when he learns his lesson finally in part 3. But gosh, that riddle was such a brilliant underarching, like, looming specter of this book for me, because like as I read Reith's journey, I was trying to figure it out too, and then I did when he crossed it alone and felt further, and I was like, it's not about being alone. But they bring the idols to this Sith shrine where they're trying to siphon the dark side energy out of it. And I do want to point this out because I'm the Yoda guy here. I just love, have all of these great masters in mystical arts and their, in their techniques of, channeling energy and siphoning it. And then, just that one small passage, like, no doubt if Yoda was here, he'd be leading the team. And I was like, yeah, my boy always be doing that, But he's off with his adventures with Lula Talasola. If you're not reading High Republic Adventures by Daniel Jose Older, please do. That's where you will get to see Yoda in action. And then Affy finds out that Scover has been using indentured servants. And Choco, let's talk about that really quickly. And no, I don't unironically start with you. But yeah, so the idols, they found out the truth about the idols, and then Affy found out about Scover's, hustle.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing where the scales are coming off of all of our characters at the same time. It's just this moment of like revelation throughout the entire story, and it's really cool to all happen together like that. But her finding out the truth, and this entire time, Claudia Gray expertly tosses in, again, there's all these like little tiny details that build up the character of how she smiles when the boss is referred to as her mom, because it's not her birth mom. It just makes her that much happier. Or when she finds out the Legacy Run disaster, was she on it? Do we know? Is she safe? She really loves her, and this relationship is a huge part of what drives her to be who she is. And that's all of these people's revelations of, especially like with the idols, learning that you have a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose of these things. And she learns she has a fundamental misunderstanding of who this person is that she's basing her life off of. Reith finds out that he has a fundamental misunderstanding of his relationship with the Force and who he needs to be, and all of this stuff is just like simultaneously happening. It's just, I don't know, it's really cool stuff. It's why I enjoy writing, and I do not write anywhere near that caliber, and it makes me want to stop writing whenever I read really good books, because I'm like, oh, I can't do that. I see what you're doing.
But then you talk to Daniel and he's like, just keep going.
Yeah. Daniel's awesome.
Fern, what about you?
I completely agree. There are these revelations that occur in this section, and not to invoke the West Wing in the year 2021. But there's this episode in like the first few seasons of the West Wing where basically all of the characters need to make various important decisions, and every single one gets it wrong. They're all dealing with different issues, but every single one makes the wrong choice, and there are consequences for that. And it's not that all of the characters have made the wrong choice in this section of the book. I mean, the Jedi have in bringing these idols away from the place where they were most needed. But even that is, they're making that choice with the best knowledge available to them at the time. I guess that's how all bad choices get made.
More info needed, please.
But it is this turning point in the story where we realize that there is more that is yet to unfold. And we see that this is like a moment of return for all of them. All of them need to go back to this place where their adventure together sort of began for very different reasons, but all with the intention of making something right.
Well, we're talking about all these revelations, and what we have yet to talk about there is the revelation that two of the people that they were helping on the Amaxine station were Nihil.
Yeah.
And so, again, I go back to Reith's part of the story, maybe just because that was what had my interest the most during this section, but having him sit in that meeting, the debriefing of the Nihil, the great disaster, all of these things, and him realizing that Nan and Haig were Nihil, and I thought back to when I started this book and they described this haphazardly put together ship, and I was waiting for them to say something about like green fire or something with 3 slashes or something. I was waiting for that because it's just what it sounded like, but they just brushed it off and I just went with it, and I just felt so stupid when finally they're like, they're Nihil, and I just describing Nan's hair with the blue streaks in it, and I just
it's so obvious.
Right,
but you don't get it.
It invoked this, honestly, it invoked this feeling of terror in me for a second, which kind of surprised me because in Light of the Jedi, I was not impressed by the Nihil until the very end. But thinking back on it and knowing the kind of horrors that this group is capable of, it just made me go, both like anger at myself for not seeing it and just fear, because poor Reith had put his trust in this girl, and I knew, again, it was a moment of like godlike feeling, like I know what this means for you, you have no idea what this means for you. And so you want to talk about revelations, wow. And that was just, it was just this feeling of like fear and disappointment and God. And then at the same time, I kind of had that same feeling when all of the masters realized that these idols were not the source of the darkness. And only then did I kind of, because I was thinking, like, as I was reading, I kept thinking back to our previous conversations about this series and how Choco was so convinced that we were going to meet the Drengir, and I hadn't seen it to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wasn't sure. We got more than halfway through the book, and I was like, wait, are we? Like, was he right about this? I don't know. And then we get to this part, and I'm like, okay, it's just plants in there. Okay, now it makes sense. So yeah, both of those things to me were just like this feeling of, yeah, they made mistakes because of the information that they had available to them at the time. But knowing what I knew about Nihil especially, it was like, okay, you have no idea how big of a mistake this was.
Yeah. I was in denial at first. I was in denial. Because like, so when they started
the Choco shirt now.
When they were talking about, the characteristics of the Nile in the Jedi Council debriefing, I was like, this is all making sense, but like they're really cute together. And and I was really hoping that if she was actually Nile, that she would defect and like, catch feelings for Wreath and just be like, this marauder lifestyle, I ain't about that life. So she goes off with Wreath, and then Wreath is like, oh, I can't form attachments. And then they're like, well, like,
I'm already here, so.
But yeah, that is a sad tale to find out. But the idols, for sure, they were there to contain a darkness, and we'll get there for part 3. But before we get to part 3, I do have to point out that this is a breaking point for our characters. In particular, Orla and Comac, who at this point, or coming up to this point, had been struggling with being themselves within their own bodies, in the face of the machine that is the Jedi Order. In their minds, at least, it's a machine. And they make the decision, and they go to Wreath, and they're like, we're gonna do this, and they didn't say that it was against the rules. They didn't expressly say we couldn't go, so come with us. And then, they go to the vessel, and of course, Affy has her own agenda with the smuggler's code that she found, and the axe is gonna go. And Geode, of course, Geode is awesome. He's like, or he doesn't do a thumbs up. He just kind of looks, and we know he's in it, And Orla, oh man, this is where she like quickly jumped as like one of my favorite characters, because they're like, we'd like to hire you to take us to the Maxine station. And I think Affy or Leox was like, oh, we've already been hired, sorry. And then Orla steps out and was like, hey, they're coming with us too. So that was awesome. That was the start of them, like, kind of actively and knowingly going against the Order, and not in a malicious way. They were just like, we have to, finish this mission. We have to fix what we broke. And so it was a very big step for their characters. And I think it was a big right step, or correct step, in them realizing their Qui-Gon Jinn-ness. And so we get to part 3, where they have to return to the Maxine station. And as Sawyer was saying, and I'm going to start with you, Sawyer, because Wreath goes and investigates Des Ryden's supposed death, and gets jettisoned to some far-off world. And where does he end up, Sawyer?
Quite the surprise. I mean, we all did, really, especially me, who had been so convinced that Des was just gone. First, I had this moment of like, oh my god, where's he going? How's he going to get back? Oh no. But he ends up on this planet, and that, he gets out. He's thinking, okay, I have a way back, obviously. There's a system here. But then he gets met with these giant plant monsters. And I at that point, I kind of figured it out that we were going to see them, but I didn't know we were going to see them elsewhere. I thought it was just going to be on the Maxine station.
The Maxine station is elsewhere.
My first reaction was not a positive one. And I can say that, like, honestly, but I'm not going to say that. Last time we met a villain, I was kind of the same way, and now I'm thinking back on it, and actually, I really like these villains. So I don't know what. I'm sure that my opinion of these guys is going to change. However, my first reaction was this Drenga comes up and talks to him, and for some reason, the fact that they could speak just didn't do it. It like lessened the threat for me. I don't know what I was expecting. We only got like a brief kind of description of what they were going to be from like the interviews that were done before any of these books and comics came out. But I was just kind of confused and wondering, like, okay, how big of a threat are these guys? Because they just kind of seemed a little goofy to me. However, then we find out that they have death with them, and they've been torturing him for, a significant period of time with all kinds of crazy toxins that we have no idea what's in them or what effect they have. And they kind of bring the vision that Wreath had way back in the beginning to life, where he has his fellow Jedi come after him. And so I guess I would say the influence of the dark side and the ability to kind of warp minds is scary, but I think they have to, if and when we see them again, they're gonna have to one up themselves for me to be really convinced that these are real bad guys.
Yes, I agree. Pretty much completely. They struck me as a little silly. They are sentient plants. I'm also a little, Sawyer probably knows much more about this than I do. How do we know they're sentient plants? Do we know, could they just be animals that have plant-like characteristics? I don't know. But I didn't buy them as a threat until we see what happens to Des, and obviously all of that is deeply horrific. I don't understand how they are so deeply tied to the dark side. They are clearly evil. They are colonizers. They intend to, spread themselves across the galaxy and cause mayhem and chaos and et cetera, et cetera. But also they refer to other organisms as meat, which is, scary. Right, exactly. That was the vibe for sure. And yes, obviously that's not a good thing for our heroes, but it almost made me think, do they just need food? Is this not a matter of good or evil, but simply a matter of these are organisms that need a particular source of nutrition, source of nutrients, and these sweet boys who have landed here are it. They are the food. So I thought it was an interesting idea. I'm not 100% sold on the execution.
Okay, that's interesting, because to me these things are terrifying. A plant that's trying to eat you. How do you kill it? How do you defeat it? And they have the ability to create like poisons and things, and the way that they're messing with his head and his emotions, they are making Des like act out in anger and like spiking his adrenaline. They're just here doing experiments, meaning that they're quite smart. It was fascinating that plants or things in nature having a connection to the dark side was not unique. They've seen it before, just never like this. And it goes to show you that these things are a universal threat. We end up finding out that the whole reason this station is built was to fight them. What happened to the Maxine warriors? There's a lot. There's a lot of potential ramifications here in introducing this new player, where the Nile aren't the only threat to the galaxy, and to try and fight on both fronts. On what do they want? What is their goal? What is their purpose? How do they reproduce? Do you just grow more? Do they have to eat enough and then and then meiosis and like I don't know.
What do they eat? I mean, of course they call humans meat, but like, is that it?
So
I mean, that's where I'm leaning.
I should have prefaced that I'm not muted, am I? Okay.
You're good.
I should have prefaced that as a biologist, there kind of is this sort of unspoken rule that you either are a plant person or an animal person, and I hate plants. I think their biology is stupid. I want nothing to do with them. I just look at a tree and I'm like, what are you? You don't make any sense. So that's probably part of where my bias comes from.
So I guess you wouldn't have enjoyed the Arboretum on the Maxine station.
I would be like, it's pretty, but like I'd also be like, look at all these stupid organisms.
Okay, so like I'm across the board here because to Sawyer's points, like the first time Wreath appeared on that planet and they started speaking, I was like, this is like a Bebop and Rocksteady moment, like fresh meat, you know. So it was a little shocking, and like I couldn't make heads or tails with how I felt with them at this point. And then, you know, they revealed how Des was being tortured and was being mind controlled, basically. And so their terrifying status was going up and up. And as we join Comac and Orla back on the Maxine station, they too have to fight the newly awakened Drenger. And they're having a rough go at it, you know. They're slashing at some vines be growing back, and nothing is working against them. All while they have to avoid the storm that is orbiting the Maxine station, because they had to, you know, hide from them to begin with on their return. And you know, we find out, and I want everyone's opinions. I'll go with Fern first. We find out, like, how does this make you feel that the original Drenger were sealed not by Jedi, but by the ancient Sith?
It's definitely a moment where my jaw physically dropped. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting to see the Jedi and the Sith more or less united in any sort of cause.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. And I also think that in this instance, yes, the Jedi and the Sith have the same goal, but very different motivations. You know, we see the characters we're following here are interested in this sort of dark presence not being able to expand and stretch across the galaxy. The Sith were interested in the same thing, but because, at least my understanding of it was, because that would be a threat. That would be a threat to their own power. It goes to show that things are always more nuanced and complex than just two opposite sides.
Absolutely. And Choco, like, just some precedents here, like, how powerful or how much of a threat do you have to be for the Sith to be like, nah?
I mean, the Sith are like, yeah, we're gonna take over the galaxy, but like we recall how Palpatine reacted when he saw Maul as a rival, and how he saw Sidious saw Mother Talzin as a rival. They do not suffer rivals. That this was a threat to, and we're talking not that this is prior to this sealing would likely have happened prior to the Rule of Two, right? So they all got together and was like, okay, we gotta I like what they're doing.
This is Sawyer's favorite topic.
I like what they're doing, but we're gonna have to ask you to calm the F down, because you know, and I love that thought. It's just fascinating, and I need to find out more about these characters with the Maxine warriors and how the galaxy was prior to the Old Republic, because there was a galaxy prior to that, and how did this all shake out? I don't know. I'm very interested.
Yeah. Sawyer, your thoughts, and in particular on top of that, the mention of the Old Republic and the Sith Empire.
That was apparently that's been mentioned before. I did not know that. I got way too excited when I read that thought that Orla was having about the Old Republic and the ancient Sith Empire. But because operating under the assumption that that's who they're talking about, obviously we don't know what bit of that is canon, if it's going to be canon, any of that, but operating under the assumption that that's what they're talking about, it could have easily been that they just saw the Drengir as a nuisance in their way more than like a real rival. But it could also mean that they really are a big threat that we haven't seen yet. I really do. I don't think we've seen the last of them. That lends itself to plenty of opportunity for us to see that they are really these evil, evil beings that are capable of so much more than just eating people. But, so yeah, I mean, I think it's either they really were this huge threat that we haven't seen yet, or, you know, if we're talking about the Sith from back then, they probably would just like, we don't want to deal with you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting to think about an enemy that even the Sith had to deal with before the Jedi got there. And, you know, like, as much as they don't promise the Sith, we are getting a lot of Sith lore in this era, despite there not being any Sith around, and we may even just get them. That may have been just a misdirect entirely. I mean, we are getting Acolyte, so there has to be some kind of, you know, pillar there that they need to kind of build on. But then we get to the battle. Of course, the Nile insert themselves into this fight, and we have this kind of three-way happening with Comac and Orla. This is where Orla really kind of takes my heart, because, you know, she the way she like laughs at people as well. I don't know if it was just like the narrator's choice, but like the way she laughs at them in the heat of the moment when it's just like a serious thing, and then she's just like, ah. You know, she reminded me of a light side Asajj Ventress, and I want everyone to kind of give me an agree or disagree on that one. But on top of that, reactions to Reath and Nan's interaction when they reunite. Choco, start us off. I loved the reunion of him seeing who she truly is. Stay on topic. Agree, disagree, light side Asajj Ventress or Lajareni?
Agree. Mostly agree. I still have a little bit of thoughts where there are bits that I don't feel are comparable. At least not directly, but I mean, I do get that inkling overall. That being said, yeah, I loved having the Reath Nan reunion, because she ain't no joke, and he like judged her before. I mean, but she kind of welcomed it. She set it up. She set him up. And when he saw her and she's like all badass and tatted up and all this stuff. But the fascinating part, though, is she wasn't putting on a persona while she was talking to him. That's still who she is. And so I think that's a really interesting turn, because she wasn't faking who she was. She was faking her motivations, her intent, her alliances. And that also brings, you know, like, I hope they have to face off again in a future book. I'm sure that's being set up, but I can't wait to have more of that reaction. But Nan did show loyalty beyond what the Nile are known for.
Yeah.
She had the opportunity to kill him, and she didn't, and he knew, like, okay, she hasn't shot me yet, that means she's not going to. But I also like how he didn't tempt that fate. You know, he didn't try to turn her, he didn't try to get her to join. He was like, she's not shooting, cool, I'm out. Like, I pictured Phantom Menace force speed at that point. It was like 0.
So yes, Orla reminds me a little bit of a light side Asajj Ventress. although I cannot put my finger on why. I do not have a reason for this. I am operating purely in the mysterious realm of vibes. But the vibes were similar for me. As for Nan and Reith, I really loved this interaction. There was a lot from this section that I loved because they helped me to understand the Nihil a little bit better. And I was sort of troubled by this when I read Light of the Jedi. And at first, I kind of saw the Nihil as like Pokemon villains. They're very committed to their aesthetic. They're very committed to their, hierarchy. And I couldn't
for trouble.
Exactly. And I couldn't quite take them seriously. And I really didn't understand why in this sort of time of prosperity and of peace, like what would cause a person to join a militant band of raiders? What would the motivation be? And I have a much better understanding now of why a person would do that. I think I sort of misinterpreted the Republic's relationship to the frontier when I read Light of the Jedi, and I understand it better now. I understand, I think, the circumstances in which Nan and her family joined up with the Nihil, and I understand that she feels this genuine sense of pride in being a part of something bigger than her. She is not loyal to this group purely out of need. We see them sort of rule with fear in Light of the Jedi. You deliver, because if you don't, there are consequences. And she's a little concerned about that, but she is also, she says she doesn't regret her choice, and she doesn't regret her parents' choice to be a part of this group. She has really found meaning, it seems, and purpose in being a part of it. And it's very sad in many ways. And also it helps me to understand the group in a much more, I guess, in a much deeper way than I did before.
And in a juxtaposition to that, maybe you can also touch on the decision that you mentioned earlier in the episode from Affy.
Yes, so this was a standout moment for me. This was a moment that I think is going to stick with me when I have to make difficult choices, because Affy is in this position where she has the evidence that she needs she wants to present to her foster mother and say, look, we can't keep doing this anymore. But she's also in a position where she knows Scover can't use the way station, as she calls it, in this way anymore. She can't continue to send people who are essentially indebted to her into danger. Affy could, at this point, turn around and say, I don't need to approach anyone. I don't need to change anyone's mind. I know the station won't be used this way. So we're done here. And there's a moment where she says she could wait until she's in charge.
Yeah.
She could wait until she runs this whole guild. She could make better decisions. She could treat people more fairly, or she could not. I'm sorry, I might have gotten a little bit ahead because I'm realizing you probably meant a different decision that Affy also makes here.
No, they're connected in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, that is what I was referring to in any way. Like, I was sort of trying to make the connection between her on the ladder and just like, all right, fine, we'll go. And then connecting that to her decision to act. But of course, we'll touch more in depth that subject in a bit. Sawyer, what about you with this part with Reith and Nan? And I have to say it, Orla Jareni's robes are still spotless.
Somehow still spotless.
Yeah.
First of all, I did not see the light side Ventress thing. And maybe I'm sorry, I didn't see it. I did not.
I get more Barriss Affy than I do Ventress.
Oh no! Don't say that. Ugh.
I don't like Barriss, but just the other direction.
I might need to give it some more thought because she probably was my favorite character from this book. So I think I need to marinate on a character a little bit more.
Well, let me clarify. It's light side version of Ventress, who is playing around with Obi-Wan, not like the evil Ventress.
I don't know. I just saw her as her own person. I wouldn't have even looked for that until you had messaged me and said, "Okay, bro, tell me who she reminds you of."
There's nothing wrong with that.
But anyway, I do love her. I love that she always manages to have her robes completely spotless. I think that's very impressive. But yeah, she's a powerhouse. But yeah, with Wreath and Nan, I mean, it was another moment where you could predict how it was going to go down, but you wouldn't get it right. And I think that Claudia Gray very much played into the fact that these were two very youthful individuals belonging to very different and very powerful groups. I do think that Nan's decision to let him go did lend itself a bit to her youth and innocence. Innocence in the sense that she hadn't completely fallen into the ways of the Nile yet. I don't think that, give it literally 1 year, maybe 2 more, or just her interaction with Marchion Rowe, and no more. That would have never happened. But you know, and I do appreciate that Wreath had learned enough to be like, okay, bye, thanks, bye. But I think you mentioned this juxtaposition, and then you brought up Afi. Nan and Afi are both part of these, like, you know, fleets, and what they both technically have the choice to leave. Afi leaves because she knows what they're doing is wrong. Nan wholeheartedly believes that this is where she belongs, and the Nile are well within their rights to do what they do. And I think that's a really interesting comparison. I wish that I almost wish that she had been just a little bit more evil, just a little bit, just because like the Nile, like, have this essence about them, and you know, I get why she did spare him, but you know, that would have just completely killed everything if she was just really, really bad to him. But another thing that I would like to bring up about this part is I was very grateful almost that we didn't know which Tempest Runner was in charge of this group of Nile, because I think it allowed us to get a lot more information about the Nile operating as one rather than the respective groups that we learn about in Light of the Jedi. I thought that was really awesome. I think that we would have had a different opinion, or at least a slightly altered reaction to their presence on the Amaxine station if we had known if they belonged to Lorna D or the Trandoshan. I can't remember his name.
How they behaved is straight out of the Lorna D playbook that we learned about in Light of the Jedi, about not speaking, not saying any more than you have to. They're trying to draw out the information from the other person. The duplicitous nature, I feel, and saying that the ones underneath them follow the same suit because that's who you also recruit. I feel like they have to be part of Lorna D's squad, personally.
I also thought it was so interesting at the very beginning when we first meet these characters and we learn that their ship is pretty much equipped just with sensors and nothing else. So they're not combat. They're not prepared for combat. And I think part of this is, of course, the ability to interlock with the other ships and become a complete unit. But they're not offensive. They don't have offensive capabilities necessarily, which I thought was just like fascinating in a villain.
Yeah, kind of like Voltron, or never mind.
Yeah. I mean, I do love me some Voltron.
I will say one criticism, just this tiny little bit of criticism I had about this part, was when Comac and Orla were fighting the Drenger, and Orla gets whipped, and she has this. Her entire leg is freezing up with poison, and there's a moment where she goes, "Okay, I need antitoxin immediately," but we don't see that happen. And so the entire time I was like, "Is she okay? Like, is this gonna play out?" Like, I don't know, really small detail, but I really wish that they had like just kind of said that because I was really convinced that she was like gonna die or something because they just kept going. That was like, I think the only negative thing.
Orla just was a complete badass in this part, and I shipped Wreath and Nan so hard. I really wanted them to find peace, love, and unity with each other, whether it was Wreath kind of like finding his Kyber arch, and Nan finding her purpose away from the Nile. But we can't all have what we want. But I do want, before we move on to like, you know, our theories and our predictions and our conclusions, with how this book ends, where everyone is headed after this incident, just like let's talk about it. The elephant in the room, and I want to start with Choco, just because this is probably your favorite moment when Wreath.
I stood up and cheered.
when Wreath spaces everybody. And we have our anime moment of the book. What was that, Choco?
Yeah, no, I stood up and cheered because this whole thing has really, you know, Wreath has been the main character of this book, and we're following his growth and his understanding and his learning what the Force is and where is the Force guiding me. I don't want to go on this mission, and he finally. After what he sees and after saving Des and all these things, he's come to term with a lot of things and realizes, you know, I'm the one that has to do this. And he makes his way down and he does just that. He spaces all of them, and he's trying to survive, but and not get sucked out into the vacuum of space. And also this book several times talks about the horrors of being sucked into space, and like, you better not have air in your lungs because it'll expand and explode and you're gonna die. Also, I hope you brought a jacket because yeah. And then like a rock, he gets saved by the firm and strong statured geode. And in that moment, he finally feels this being, that he is a living being and utterly unique in the Force. And he like finally gets it. And yeah, I stood up and cheered because I was worried about him. I was like, okay, they keep teasing all this death and stuff. Okay, they're gonna do nope. And we get the most heroic moment of the book, in my opinion. And like I said, it was pretty early in the morning. And yeah, I stood up and I cheered. Just me in my room by myself with headphones. So that was weird, but no one was there to see it. So I probably shouldn't have said it here. Anyways, I enjoyed it.
But it was also a very anime moment too, because they set that up like... They were all at the vessel and just like, okay, we're about to go in. It's like, where's Geode? And then scene cuts. And then it goes into...
None.
Yeah. Sawyer, your thoughts on the end there? Like...
So I did not have... I did not have the fear that he was going to die. I kind of figured that the airlock was just going to close just in the nick of time. I much prefer how it ended up, because I kind of figured that we were going to, at some point, Geode was going to be the hero, and that was going to be the answer we needed to whether or not what was going on with this guy. I like ran to my flatmates and I was like, Geode saved the day. I kept reading them passages about Geode because he really is the best character in this book. But yeah, no. So that was just, once they were like, "Where's Geode?" Like, obviously, I knew he was gonna have something to do with the heroism at the end of the book, and I was very pleased. But I really something that I enjoyed them particularly about this bit was Wreath's kind of internal monologue that he had and his decision to, potentially sacrifice himself for the sake of his friends, and just be okay with, thinking he came full circle, and he still hadn't quite figured it out. He didn't until he got back to Coruscant once more, but it was a really beautiful moment, and just kind of the perfect end to his adventure that he needed, and I really enjoyed seeing that. And also, I just thought it was such a badass move that he was like, "Okay, everybody out," which would be my biggest, worst fear in space. But it was kind of cool to see that happen, because that's kind of a trope that we've seen before in other sci-fi. But it was just, I don't know, it was really the whole thing with them deciding that the Nile were going to fight the Drenga, and then they just, I don't know, I loved that whole plan.
I do have to ask you something, Element.
Mm-hmm.
Because I certainly had a song play in my head at that moment where Regio saves him. I'm curious if you had the same song play in your head. Did you have anything like that happen?
I Need a Hero.
That is a good one. For me, I had Forever Young from Initial D.
Yeah.
He's flying it in. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it, Fern? Not necessarily what I just said, but this section. But if you did have an awesome song, feel free to toss it out there.
I had no song, unfortunately. I have so many thoughts about this scene. Firstly, Wreath decides that this is something he has to do because he solves the riddle. He solves Master Jor's riddle about the Kyber Arch. And the answer is he can't cross it alone because the Kyber crystals, come from fallen Jedi, and Jedi before them had to build the arch before you can cross it. And I like solving riddles and puzzles, so I tried to do so early on in the book after we first saw a Jedi cross it on his own. And I sort of figured it out, and I didn't want to be right about this one. When Wreath has this moment of, oh, I get it now and I understand what I have to do, I really did fear for Wreath in that moment. I was afraid that he had solved this riddle, he understood what he needed to do, and that this would be a moment of self-sacrifice, necessary, but still quite tragic. So I was glad that Geode showed up to save the day. And I did not see that coming at all, because I saw Geode as this very Douglas Adams-esque character. He reminded me of a bit out of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it seems like some people can understand him, but others can't, and he doesn't ever talk, and he, stands there stoically. All of which felt very tongue-in-cheek, felt very, not satirical, but definitely funny, because it was funny. And so I did not think that was headed anywhere other than just, it's a funny bit. It's this funny reoccurring joke throughout the course of the book. And so when he showed up to save the day, I had a similar reaction of joy and excitement. But it was because I didn't see it coming at all.
Yeah, I similarly stood up and cheered as well. That's something I did not expect either. I thought, I knew at some point that something was going to happen, like to Sawyer's point. I thought the bulkhead was just going to close on time, or, Comac or Orla was going to jump in and save him. It's weird it's weird to me to admit that I had not seen Geode as a possibility of saving Wreath. Like he was the furthest thing from my mind. I was like, oh, maybe Affy went, maybe Comac or Orla. And when they like, especially the way Claudia Gray wrote it, I don't remember the full verbatim, but like Wreath hits his body against something solid and then turns around and there's the face of Geode, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? It was definitely a crazy and a very welcome conclusion to that story. And then we get to the very end where, everyone is sort of going off on their own and choosing their paths moving forward. Comac is still, wrestling with the demons in his head about, being disillusioned with the Order. And he's very much correct in his thoughts of hesitation with taking on Wreath as a new Padawan. And then Jareni, she has decided this is her life. This is her choice. She's going to be a Wayseeker. She gets her own ship. Affy takes down Scoverbine, and Dez. This is our second mention of the Barish Vow since the Darth Vader comic. Is an interesting choice that I did not see coming. But Sawyer, start us off with everyone's choices, who stood out, and if they made the right choice, and what your opinions are on the end of the book.
Yeah, I would say Des probably shocked me the most. I thought that was very, I don't want to say out of place because it was obviously done with intent. But that did, I guess it sort of makes sense because he's kind of reckless and he's like, whoa, and he's slowed down. But I didn't necessarily think that meant he was going to go take the Barish Vow. But good for him. Good for him. With Affy, it kind of seemed, she never struck me as one to make the wrong choice. So I was pretty certain she was going to go turn Scover in, especially just with the way she was interacting with her on Coruscant. It did that familial, motherly relationship she claimed to have with her just wasn't there. And because she was already questioning whether or not this woman really, was in the right. And even almost, before she found out exactly what it was she was doing. So that did not surprise me. I was kind of surprised to hear that, literally within the hours of her filing the report, Scover had been arrested. But then again, the Republic seems to have their shit together right now during this time period. So I guess it makes sense. And then... similarly with Orla, I figured that was she never really seemed, she had her doubts, but it in comparison to Comac, it always kind of felt to me like she was going to reach that conclusion, whereas Comac was just so, disorderly with his emotions and trying to figure that out that I wasn't exactly sure where he was going to go. And he's not exactly sure where he's going to go at the end. He literally says that to Wreath. And then we have Wreath and his choice to train under Comac, and that I was happy for him. There were a lot of points in this book where I was frustrated that he still had not learned the lesson, which makes sense. Lessons like that are really hard to learn, but I was very proud of him, honestly, that he came to the conclusion that he did need to go back out to the frontier, even though he still didn't like adventure. And it really did feel like at the end, he wasn't doing it for his master anymore. For his fallen master, he was doing it for himself. And so above all else, I wouldn't say that one was super surprising, but it made me very, pleased for the character. And but that being said, I'm very curious to see what his next adventure is. with Comac. That's going to be an interesting, not relationship. They're going to be a solid team, I think, but I'm very, very interested to see the challenges that those two are going to face on the frontier.
Next time on The Acolyte. Fern?
Yes, I am also very curious to see what becomes of Comac and Wreath. I sort of thought, since we knew that Jorah was not going to survive the duration of this book, I thought there were sort of two possibilities for Wreath getting a new master. I thought it would either be Des or Comac. And I like that Des makes this choice to dedicate himself to healing. I think that, at least the narrative that I have seen, and I do not know if this is universally the narrative, probably not, but there's this assumption that like the Jedi Order emphasizes repression of emotions, which is how Comac sees things. Mm-hmm. And that if, someone like Anakin Skywalker just had a good therapist, everything would have turned out all right. And I will admit that I'm not basing this off of any evidence at all. This is just purely my interpretation of the Jedi Order. But I feel that that's not true. Like, I feel that they have structures in place for healing from trauma because, of course, Jedi are put in traumatic situations all the time. It's not sustainable to not have those systems in place. And so we see Des make quite a drastic choice, but one that is ultimately going to help him to heal, that is going to allow him to mend his connection to the Force. And I love that. It was not what I expected from the character at all, but it felt very satisfying to me. As for Affy, like I said earlier, I think the choice she makes is the most interesting one in the entire book, because she really could wait. She knows that she's going to inherit this company, and when she's in charge, she could make the right decisions and she could make things better. But she realizes for the indentured people that this guild employs, they can't wait. They can't wait a lifetime to be free from this debt that they owe. And so she has to act now. I think it's so easy to fall into this idea, well, I can't do anything about it now, but I'll wait, and then one day I'll be in charge, or I'll have the power to make a difference, when in reality, often the time to act is now. And Affy makes that choice, and it was inspiring to me. As for Comac and Wreath, I think obviously there are many paths for these characters, but I think they more or less fall into two categories, and that's they learn from each other, they grow from each other, they turn out to be what they need, both of them having experienced the loss of a master, both of them interested in similar fields. Wreath has read Comac's research before they even meet. And so in that way, maybe there'll be a really solid partnership, and that's what I hope for. But we know that Comac is still struggling, and he has not found peace within himself yet. Maybe he'll find that through teaching. Maybe he won't. And that could potentially lead both Comac and Wreath down a very dark road. So I'll be interested to see what happens to the two of them.
And we get like a small measure of that sort of therapy when Wreath learns about Jorah's death. The council is like, this is a huge choice for you. Take all the time you need. You can leave or you continue your training. So they're not necessarily like slamming a hammer down on him, being like, move on, let go of attachment, repress your feelings, and continue your mission. I thought it was a nice look into just a little bit of compassion on their part to just be like, you don't have to be yourself right now. Just kind of take a moment for yourself. But
I really love that.
But Choco?
Yeah. So, the way this whole story, kind of wrapped up, and I also kind of figured out the meaning behind crossing the arch. It just, as soon as he saw someone do it alone, I was like, okay. And it just brought me to the quote of, if I have seen further, it's from Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, which I just always loved that quote. But I love that message as well, because each and every individual person in the story is going on this journey, but their journeys don't only affect them. And we kind of see their a lot of their understanding of this. Now, each person needs something different, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I wish more people could really take that to heart, because we have a bunch of people that underwent the same exact traumatic event. And yes, being tortured by plant monsters and stuff is pretty traumatic. But what each and every one of them needed to move on, to move forward, to heal, to grow, or at least what they think the best course, was all different. And that's okay. And they all understood it and let them move on and go with their journeys. I love the fact that Reith had a master before that perfectly aligned with everything that he wanted to do, but you don't get to grow that way. So his choices kind of is going to help him grow. But his new master, I mean, they're very different people, and by taking on this apprentice, he's going to grow. And I just really enjoyed that. Plus, I really love the way you put it, Fern, about Affy and her decision of, yes, I could wait, because this is something that we see common in today's climate of, you know what, we're going to change the system from within, but there's people dying right now. So that's cool and all, but and I definitely understand that desire, but no, it needs to stop now, because a lot more people are going to die before then, and who knows if you could be changed throughout that whole process. There's so many, like, really, I loved where everyone went. It makes me sad, because it means it's extremely unlikely that we will have this same group of people together on another mission, besides, of course, the crew of the vessel. But I also enjoyed where we left Nan and her actually meeting with Marchion Ro, and her commitment. And like, now she's more committed than ever, and she has the experience with the Jedi. And I think we might watch her rise up the ranks and eventually run her own crew. I don't know. We'll see.
Interesting. So we are running out of time, but before we wrap up, I do want to get everyone's final thoughts, theories, and predictions for the next story. But Choco, I do want to continue with you, just because I know you have a very, very insightful theory, and I'm sure it'll spark some ideas. Maybe Fern and Sawyer also share the same theory, but yeah. Predictions, theories going forward with the High Republic after Into the Dark.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see, like, I already speculated that what we're going to see eventually is whatever chain of supernovas that happened that separated the unknown regions, right? But this whole thing was based off of the Amaxian warriors, and specifically that this base had interesting hyperspace capabilities that allowed them to kind of sneak in behind enemy lines and cause a lot of damage as a vanguard to whatever their invasion is. We don't know a lot about the Amaxian warriors. We did get some information about them in Claudia Gray's other book, Bloodlines. But, I mean, Marchion Ro has to be a descendant of the Amaxian warriors. That's where I feel pretty certain of that. And that would also explain, because obviously they had some sort of agreement or alignment with the Sith, and Marchion Ro knew how to deal with the Jedi. We found that out in Light of the Jedi. Where did he get that information? Some of the stuff was coming through his family. Who were his family? I think they had to be, part of this group, and who were, again, obsessed with using hyperspace in new and interesting ways. And I think they succeeded. And who knows? I feel like the Sith Wayfinder, again, I brought it up last time, but this could also be a kind of a marriage of the two technologies of both of these groups of people. I think there's a lot of fascinating, ramifications of this storyline, but we also need to figure out where is this planet with the plant monsters, because that would be good to know. I'm just saying,
I wonder if we'll find out. But
next week on Dragon Ball Z.
Sawyer, your final thoughts, theories, conclusions?
Yeah, I mean, this book, well, I mean, as I said from the beginning, is very different from Light of the Jedi. And with that book, we end the story with this horrific nightmare vision that Elzar Mann has. And I think maybe this is just because I want to believe it, but there was some thoughts that maybe the Drengir had something to do with that. And now that we know their capabilities of manipulating Force users, and the fact that they have such a deep connection to the dark side of the Force, I think it's a decent possibility that they have a large role to play in whatever vision that Elzar had. And I hope that's not just wishful thinking because I want them to be scarier. But and then the other thing, I think, I really don't have anything to say about Marchion Ro. I have no idea anything about him. I almost want to remain out of the loop, because the way that he surprised me at the end of The Light of the Jedi, I want that. I want that to continue. But the only other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is Cohmac and Reath, because Cohmac right now is at he's inching in on a very dangerous, path. And now he's decided that what he needs is a student, and I don't think that's over. I don't think it's a one and done. Okay, I'm a teacher now. Bye-bye. I can deal with my emotions. No, I think if there is room for there to be some Sith influence in this story, I think it's going to be part of his journey, and Reath's journey. I'm pretty certain of that. I could be wrong. All of these are just speculation, but I don't think he's out of the hole there. I think we're gonna see him at the very least step 1 foot in to the dark side, at least at some point. But other than that, I remain completely oblivious to what's going on here, because there's just so much in the best of ways.
Fern?
Yeah, I mean, I have my wish list of things I would like to see, but I don't have many theories beyond. Similarly, I think whatever happens to Cohmac and Reath, we will get a better understanding of the Force, I think, through their journeys together, their teachings and studies together. I think we might get a better understanding of the dark side of the Force than I personally am comfortable with. Whether that's just through brushes with it or something more extreme, like we learn in A Test of Courage, it's intentional choices going down that path. And I wonder if that's something we'll see from Cohmac, or if that's something we'll see from Reath, which right now feels impossible to me. And yet that might be the right influence, or more likely the wrong influence, could potentially be a direction he heads down. though I can't see that right now. But I other than that, I just have my wish list. On it is Orla going on adventures that are one part, reconnecting with the Force and understanding the role of her own instinct in her actions, and then one part just pure swashbuckling. Would love to see some swashbuckling from Orla. I think she'd be great at it.
I totally agree. And now, as much as it doesn't make sense in the timeline, I want her to be the acolyte, but it doesn't make sense.
We do have a monster hunting sword for hire that's coming up as well.
That's true. In terms of what you said with Comac, it is hinted at with his kind of disillusionment with the Jedi Order when he says, how are we supposed to understand the darkness if we don't study it, and you deny that wholeheartedly, and you're supposed to fight against it. But it's interesting to see, or at least speculate, where Comac and Reith go from this point forward. I'm definitely a subscriber to Marchion Ro being an Amaxian warrior. It makes complete sense. He's got gray skin, and most of them are described as such. And his family has history with the Jedi. They know how to deal with their techniques, and I may go so far as to say they have a history with the Sith as well. And that is probably working together to seal the Drinker. But I think what's going to happen with the books going forward is we are getting sequels to them. And I want to say this to ease everyone's burdens of like thinking about we're not going to revisit these characters again, because I think what they're doing, what the story group is doing with these books, is something really, really brilliant, and that is playing allegorically with the balance of the Force. We have the light of the Jedi, and the sequel to that is going to be The Rising Storm. Then we have Into the Dark, but we're going to be Out of the Shadows. So I think the next book, Rising Storm, is going to kind of connect with Light of the Jedi, and then the book afterwards, Out of the Shadows, is going to connect to Into the Dark. So at least that's my theory. So we can look forward to maybe revisiting Comac, and I know Choco right now is looking at the release dates for these new books. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it makes complete sense. Powerful light and powerful dark. The dark rises and the light to meet it, and so these titles are creating these or painting these pictures where the stories will paint both respective sides of the Force. But we are out of time. I would like to thank Sawyer and Annalise, or Fern, for joining us in this discussion. It is a huge ask to request of anyone to read a book in a week. I won't wish it upon anyone else to read this book in a night. I just need to do it for my own sanity. But thank you guys for coming on. It was such a huge pleasure. Do you guys have any final thoughts, Sawyer?
Me? I don't know. If you like podcasts, I've got another one that you might be interested in. It's called the Star Wars Podcast. It's on YouTube and Spotify, and I asked Google, my Google Home today, if she could play it for me, and she did, which was pretty cool. But that is myself and another TikTok creator, Discount Bo-Katan, Hannah. All of these guys will be on it very soon. But yeah, we just started. We've got 4 episodes out. We're covering a lot of some lore, but a lot of questions and concepts within the fandom, within the fan base itself, that I haven't seen covered a lot. That's kind of what we're about.
Tune in. They have some great episodes. My favorite in particular is talking about the Night Sisters. I love lore.
I do not have a podcast, but thank you very much for having me on this one. It was a great time as always, and I love getting to talk about these books with people who are as invested and excited about them as I am. It's really wonderful.
Absolutely. Like the situation coming from where I was maybe a year out from now, or a year from now, I was like, I didn't have anyone to talk to about Star Wars. Like, yeah, I would go with my brother to see Star Wars, and then we'd get out of the theater, and I'd be talking about things, and he'd be like, yeah, I don't know what you're just saying to me. This is like alien language. And so, like, Choco, he's my dude. He's my dyad. Like, just the person I talk to the most about Star Wars. And additionally, to have met you guys and to share such a connection with reading the books, especially because that's where we get most of our stuff that while waiting for our TV shows and our movies. So yeah, you guys are the best, especially for reading this book in the amount of time that we ask of you. And we definitely will have you back for Rising Storm and maybe Out of the Shadows, perhaps Edge of Balance. Maybe we'll make some manga readers out of you guys. Yeah, Choco, any final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love being able to talk this stuff and just nerd out. I mean, Dyad and the Force, Team Choco. But having seen the Star Wars podcast, it is great. So give some love to Sawyer. I put it down because that's where she's on my Zoom. I don't know if it's the same for you, but that's okay. My favorite episode of the Star Wars hasn't happened yet because I haven't been on it yet. But no, she does great stuff. There's also the High Ground podcast. I try to have different people on each and every week, and we just jump out to a different topic and to different films. This week we'll be talking about the final movie in the franchise, Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. So I am excited about that. So Sawyer is going to be one of the guests on that. But also support us here at Dyad and the Force. We love talking Star Wars with all of you guys. I mean, I got started because I've been into reading and all this stuff so much that I used to listen to a bunch of podcasts, and but they didn't read anything, and they would start to fall behind or get things wrong or stuff like that. And I didn't have a place to turn. So I'm happy that creating content has found me some amazing people that love this stuff as much as I am. So I appreciate all of you guys. And once again, Team Choco.
This is to be able to do this every week is just a gift, a gift that keeps on giving. But with that said, we are out of time, and that is the end. On to the next one. May the Force be with you.
We are all the Republic.
For light and life.
And for life.